Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another 2C live stream. We're going to come to you guys with some semi-breaking news that came out earlier this evening. First, I'm just going to double check the sound quality because I think we got some problems. There we go. Okay, I think we're better now. Can you guys hear me? In the live chat, we're going to come to you guys as well to make sure we get your reaction on what has come out earlier tonight in the news. So, a year ago, well, months ago, less than a year ago, when the Ukraine crisis started, the whole conflict, of course, you had the NATO allies, the Western European countries getting together with their Ukrainian flags and emojis, but they also started to implement a refugee program. And the United Kingdom became one of the leading countries in regards to this refugee program. But there was a bit of a problem because there was no long-term plan. They said, well, okay, we're going to use taxpayers' money. We're going to get the government to use taxpayers' money to bring Ukrainian refugees here. Okay, and many other countries were allocating them as well. And then they said, families, British families, they can accommodate if they want to have a Ukrainian person or family in their home. And we're going to get the government to, again, use taxpayers' money to give them some sort of backing for a while. And we've had already some issues with some of the incidents around the country. But this is about the whole of the program that is collapsing right now because no one thought about the long-term consequences. So the homeless Ukrainian refugees as a rate have gone up by 30% in a month because a lot of the British families and those who were accommodating when it comes to the Ukrainian refugees, they basically stopped. And the government don't know what to do because the Ukrainians are just basically being left alone on the streets, and so they are all by default now homeless, refugee and homeless. The government didn't really think about this, did they? Because they came out to do this policy, and they say, well, provide support for at least 6 months in return for government backing of £350 a month. So the government said, for at least 6 months, we are going to be returning the favour and we are going to be giving you, the British citizens who are helping the Ukrainian refugees, we're going to give you £350 a month so that you could spend on your guests and the refugees. And then suddenly there were a number of reasons. Sometimes some of the refugees didn't really get along with the hosts. Sometimes, but the time limit basically came up and they said, okay, we can't really get government support anymore, so goodbye. But the government didn't really come to collect them. The government didn't really come to say, okay, now let's all go somewhere else. There is absolutely no plan, and this is just the beginning of this crisis. Now, when it comes to this whole situation and in terms of the numbers, what we're looking at is more than 2,000 families with children and 900 individuals are now officially homeless because the program didn't work long term, because they didn't have a long term plan, as I said earlier. And people wonder, why is it not working? It's because politicians came up with a plan in a rush and nobody knew what to do afterward. And we already have British homeless people who we're not even helping, and we're going to have to deal with this at the same time. So instead, one of the senior figures from one of the local governments said, we are facing a perfect storm. There is a cliff edge with the Home for Ukraine scheme, combined with growing demand from UK families facing eviction because they can't pay their rent. This is on top of the asylum crisis and 10,000 Afghans also who are largely living in unsuitable hotels. It is a disaster. So British families themselves, and some of them became generous and they got involved with this scheme. Now they're having their own crisis. They have their own cost of living crisis. They can't even afford their own rent. And as I said, a number of reasons have been that there's been a bit of a divorce between the Ukrainian refugees and some of the British families who are hosting them. One of them is also this: when the British families can't really afford to even pay their own rent, and sometimes landlords get into trouble and everything else, then you wonder why. They can't. They were never going to be able to host the refugees, the Ukrainian refugees, forever. It didn't even get to a year because the government backing was always limited anyway. And on top of that, as we said, we also have the Afghan refugees, and we also still have British citizens who are homeless, British citizens who are still waiting in the queue to get government support. But we're not doing anything about that. And they're also, the virtual signaling is basically kind of fading away. So they're not even going to help the Ukrainian families because they're just going to be on the streets. And you're going to see some problems. Good luck with that now. I'm going to go to the live chat to see your reaction, guys. Let me know your thoughts on this topic. Let's see. We have Bluter. There you go. Guess what? It says could be millions more coming out of Ukraine this winter when the Russians wipe out the electricity grid. It's happening now. That's also another problem. And we have someone saying, tell them to go to France and come back in a boat. All and boom, sorted. But even that is not really sustainable. They're going to run out of hotels. This is interesting because Mark Jones says hotels are all full out of season for some strange reason. There's some people want to book a hotel for Christmas. Maybe like a spa or something for their own family. British people, they can't. This Christmas, you can't even do domestic holidays because many hotels in many areas are now completely occupied and booked out essentially. Let's see what we have here. Dawood says, we need people out for homeless, I think homeless people in the UK and around the world. Yeah, we're out for the, I don't know. I think that's what they meant. In terms of the spelling, I couldn't see. So what else do we have? Here we have kids saying, this was all just window dressing, an empty gesture. Like the Nightingale hospitals. That's actually a very, very good comparison. Obviously there are slight differences, but actually genuinely there were no long-term planning. It's not just a long-term planning. There was no actual assessment of what sort of short-term need we have for any of these problems, whether it was the Nightingale hospitals during the first lockdown and it continued and it was empty. They were all empty because they overestimated the situation in terms of NHS capacity. But again, some might say, well, it was still better than nothing. It's good to have something. But again, they didn't know what to do afterwards. And even with this, the Ukrainian refugee scheme, as we said, now that it's no longer sustainable, now that the families are tearing apart, and there's so many other issues as well on a societal basis, now British families are getting a divorce with the Ukrainian refugees. So they're now all on the streets, basically. 30% increase in a month. That is huge. Liam Kay says, I'm from Ireland. We have a huge migrant crisis as well. The government are just letting them. We have a huge homeless crisis as well. That's the thing. The so-called Western prosperous nations, they made so much progress towards the end of the 20th century when it comes to general economic stability. But then it's going backwards. From your Americas to your Canadas and Frances, your Germanys, Irelands and the UKs, homelessness is going up again, not just in terms of the refugees and illegal migrants as well, but also even natives and veterans, of course. No one is doing anything about it because there's no voting bloc. That's the thing. And that's the reality. So Toddy Terrence says, thank you so much for your £10 super chat, Toddy, by the way. Hello, Maya. Not sure if you're aware, but there is a one world religion going on. And the deal has been made by religious leaders. It's officially called the Abrahamic Family House. This needs talking about. I'll definitely look into this for you, Toddy, and everybody else to see what's next. At this point, every half an hour something comes up, guys. Every half an hour we have to deal with another chaotic situation. Okay, so we have Christopher with us saying we could have had a lot more refugees if we had not filled the hotels with illegal migrants. That's a good point, because when it comes to genuine political refugee situations and people who actually are running away from conflict zones, and most of the time, especially depending on the country and the culture, they would end up being temporary guests because they want to go back. For example, even though it's been 4 decades, the vast majority of Iranians across the world, they all want to go back to Iran the moment the revolution happens. So when you have genuine refugees, on the one hand, most of the time they will be temporary guests. And so secondly, you can actually show your generosity as a country by obviously not go crazy, not just open the door to everybody, but it's a small group per country you could actually temporarily help. But you can only do that if you're controlling your borders. You can only do that if you don't have a crisis with illegal migration. If you don't have a problem with also those who are legally coming in, but they're still basically cheating the system. They're taking advantage of the system. We have a comment saying, "I'm sick of this weak government." It's sad because on these issues, Margaret Thatcher in the 80s, when she did an interview once, they were talking about the continent of Europe and, of course, the supremacy of the European Union. And she said, obviously out of context, she said, "They're a weak lot, weak bunch, a lot of them in Europe, weak and feeble." But that was when at least the British state was a bit stronger, a bit more confident, and with a bit more conviction. Now, right now, even the UK politicians are a bit bonkers. Okay, so we have Peace Poppy saying, in Ireland, they're not just putting migrants in hotels, they are now building units to house them. There are bound to be riots. I mean, if it comes to actual accommodations, whether it's centres or tents or whatever, firstly, for the native residents and citizens of a country, ideally you don't want to get to that point. Ideally, you want to have a stable economic environment where you don't really have that situation. Homelessness will always exist. There will always be a minority of cases, and you ideally want them to be temporary, and of course a lot with mental health crises. But in reality, you don't really want mass homelessness even inside the country for their own citizens. And if it gets to that point, and if you're creating big centres and obviously areas, housing units, then they should come first, obviously, right? And then the migrants. But right now, seems to be the other way around. Just a quick recap for you guys who just joined late. So there's a bit of a problem right now because the Ukrainian refugee scheme is collapsing because a lot of the Ukrainian refugees who were housed and accommodated by British families are now homeless. And we've had a 30% increase in a month recently because for various reasons, British families can't really host these migrants anymore. And we are having some issues because the government could only provide support for a few months. And now everything is collapsing. We have more than 2,000 families with children and then 900 individuals, Ukrainians, who are now officially homeless. And they don't even know what to do about it. Local governments are freaking out. The central government are just too busy taking pictures with foreign leaders. And nothing is being done until the next election. Just wait until the election season starts. When the campaigns begin, you're going to have Keir Starmer, you're going to have Rishi Sunak and all these guys going out there. So we have a proper plan. We really care about these problems. We genuinely now are going to be doing something about something. And then the election is going to be finished. Whoever's going to win, they're going to repeat the same thing. I can assure you, you're going to have comprehensive plans and programs from both parties in the next election. Suddenly, everyone becomes smart. Suddenly, everyone is full of ideas. Suddenly, they really care. But in reality, genuine alternative plans come from parties, smaller parties that have had the time to just, if those who are successful, obviously, like Reform UK, they've had the time to not really get involved with the drama of mainstream media and PR stunts and all this nonsense. They sit down, and they come up with policy ideas, and then they prepare them to present at the next election. And even right now, Reform UK are already presenting policies before the election. Technically, you would say, oh, you're doing it so early. But because they want to be coming across as a credible party rather than just a protest vote for the next election. They have Spanish John saying, both parties are exactly the same. Yeah, I mean, obviously, that's one of the biggest issues that we are currently having. And as another person says, they've had 12 years. And it's not really about the ideological differences between red and blue, because obviously, as the previous comment said, they're the same anyway. But even the tiny, tiny ideological differences between red and blue some of these crises, whether it's the NHS or the economy or taxation or this, it's not really about red and blue anymore. It's simply about the Westminster bubble. When we say they're all the same, we mean they don't really have any difference in terms of freaking out. They're technically on migration, Team Blue or the con-socialists, they should freak out. It's that their party is supposed to be conservative. But no, they definitely don't care. What do we have here? Saying, not our problem. This government has created all these problems we've been having to deal with, and this problem since the beginning of 2020, when Boris Johnson told the frogs to keep sending them over here. There was so much complacency in 2020 when the boat crisis started. It took him a while to even notice it. It had to be Nigel Farage going to Dover, start filming, and of course there were others in Dover and in Kent throughout this whole time, like Active Patriot and many others. But when it got to Nigel Farage, because he's got a bigger platform, when he started posting these videos on Twitter and YouTube, then you had Priti Patel coming out say, I have a new idea, guys. By the way, I've noticed the problem. Nobody noticed, but I, Priti Patel, only noticed it. We're going to fix the migrant boat crisis. It's now almost 2023. Nothing has been done about it. We have another comment saying, Maya, the government needs a complete clean out. It's not just the government, unfortunately, it's the whole of the Westminster Village that needs a bit of a clean up. The House of Commons needs a complete change in terms of culture, in terms of the type of people. It's not really, again, just about party colours, because they all end up doing the same thing, like robots, sheep robots. Okay, what do we have here? Normie, the neighbour says, red or blue, all run by the European Union. Well, it's not necessarily run by the European Union, it's that they are all following the same global consensus, the set of values that are basically running their political class from Canada to New Zealand. They're all mainstream politicians are basically following the same rule book, let's just say. It's not necessarily a group of lizards in Brussels deciding for them, calling them. It's not like that. It's not like a Marvel movie. It's unfortunately it's a lot simpler than that, but again, it's not easy to defeat, because it's still basically people deciding. You've got a group of academics who've been started this in the 50s. They started infiltrating and brainwashing all areas, initially culture and everything else, and now the political class, they're in it. They've infiltrated. And nobody saw that coming. So all these conspiracy theories are now complete real life scenarios. We have Cold Breeze saying, this is the worst government in history. It will not change while we have Ramonas running it. It's also just basic incompetence as well. It's not just those who have the bad agenda. It's also just even some of the friendly Brexiteer Tories that we used to like when the moment they got into government, they all became incompetent. So even those had great intentions, what did they do? What did they actually achieve in this government? And they could have excuses. They could blame somebody for all these problems. But stop shifting the blame and take responsibility. We do have a reminder that let's not forget about the UN Migration Pact. Also, just the general speaking, decades ago, the UN Refugee Convention, all these areas are outdated. And we need to withdraw, and we need to actually lead the world, at least the Western world, into a better direction, rather than just becoming completely isolated or just going on with the herd of globalism. You need to actually create a new consensus. And we're going to create our own new world order. No, stop with the world orders, please. Please, for the love of God. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this update. Obviously, it's not really a good update. It's still doom and gloomy, but hopefully, now that we've done this video, tomorrow we're going to hopefully we'll see some reaction from Westminster, because we are still one of the most watched political show in the UK on the internet. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, if you want to get your own pro-Brexit and anti-globalist merchandise, you can find the link in the description to the shop as well. I'm My2C, and we are the media.